Okay, hi everybody. Good evening and morning and afternoon and
Yeah.
happy time zone wherever you are. I am very excited about tonight's panel. And I must say that I greatly enjoyed the novels of both Carol and John. So, how do the highly acclaimed novelists, John Gaspard and Carol Pouliot, write their unique mysteries, and how much research actually goes into their novels? What inspires their inclusion of magicians and paranormal elements in a work of detective fiction? And what are some of the things they wish they had known before they started? Gaspard and Pouliot will discuss their writing processes, from the first spark of inspiration to the birth of their characters, as well as the awakening of the mystery writer in them, and whether or not we can actually judge a book by its cover. So, Carol and John, I welcome you both.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know Carol, Carol has been a Francophile at age 11, and she dreamed of going to Paris since then. After a master's degree at Stony Brook University, she headed to France for her first teaching job. She taught French and Spanish for over 30 years in upstate New York and founded an agency that provided translations in over 24 languages. Carol is the author of the Blackwell and Watson time travel mysteries, including the latest, Death Rang the Bell. When not writing, Carol can be found reaching for her passport and packing a suitcase for her next adventure. You can sign up for Carol's newsletter and learn more about Carol at her website from www.carolpouliot.com. And I'll be sharing this in the chat box during our discussion this evening. John Gaspard is author of the Eli Marks mystery series, as well as 3 other standalone novels: The Greyhound of the Baskervilles, The Sword and Mr. Stone, and The Ripperologists. He also writes the Como Lake Players mystery series under the pen name Bobbie Raymond. In real life, John's not a magician, but he has directed 6 low-budget features that cost very little and made even less. That's no small trick. He's also written multiple books on the subject of low-budget filmmaking. Ironically, they've made more than the films. Those books, Fast, Cheap, and Under Control, and Fast, Cheap, and Written That Way, are available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook formats. John lives in Minnesota and shares his home with his lovely wife, several dogs, a few cats, and a handful of pet allergies. So we're very happy to have you with us today, Carol and John. And I must say, again, I really enjoyed reading your novels. Great page turners, very smart, very funny. And this is why I want to ask you, I want to start the conversation by asking you to tell us, or to tell your audience, a little bit more about your work. So what are your novels about? Carol, would you want to start?
Sure, and thank you so much for hosting us today. I'm really happy to be here. My novels, all of them in the series, are basically mysteries. There's a mystery at the core. They're time travel twist inside. There's a seemingly impossible romance, but they're traditional police procedures. I started with my characters, Stephen and Olivia. Stephen is a Depression-era cop. He lives in 1934. And Olivia is a former journalist who now owns her own research agency and does freelance travel writing. She lives in 2014. So they're 80 years apart. And in the first book, Doorway to Murder, they come face to face one night when time folds over in the house they share. While coincidentally, Olivia had recently done some research about time for a client, and she had found out that Einstein thought that there was no past, present, or future. He thought that all time happened at the same time and that time could fold over. thus revealing another time. So she says to Stephen when they see each other, actually what happens is she wakes up in the middle of the night and sees him standing at her bedroom door. She has no idea what's going on. She thinks maybe she's got a brain tumor. From his point of view, he had recently lost his mother and he was grieving quite deeply. He thought maybe, all the emotions were making him a little crazy. So both of them were obviously very confused about what was happening. But she says to him, I just did this research and I think maybe this is Einstein. They do some experiments to find out what's going on, and they discover that's exactly what it is. So that particular experience, they start meeting every evening by design, and they start to get to know each other, and they do some experiments to see how far they can push this time folding over experience, and they decide to take another step and see if Olivia can go into his house. They're in the same house. I don't know if I said that. And lo and behold, he takes her hand and brings her across the threshold into 1934. Well, as a traveler, it doesn't get any better than that. So it all starts from there. They become friends. They get together each evening. And in the first book, Doorway to Murder, Stephen is working on a murder of a bank president and this big bank robbery. And he gets to a point in his investigation where he can't trust anybody in his own time. So he turns to Olivia, and sitting at his kitchen table in 1934, telling her about his case, drinking tea and eating fig Newtons, she weighs in on it. She ends up being a little bit of a sounding board, and she ends up helping him solve the case. So that's how they start. In the second book, Threshold of Deceit, they're quite comfortable with each other, moving back in each other's time, but they haven't left the house yet because they're afraid of what might happen. So Olivia says, hey, I want to go out in town and see what, Knightsbridge looks like 80 years ago. So they take it in very cautious, careful steps. And eventually, after a few days, she leaves the house. Well, she's quite gregarious and she's a former reporter. She's really curious about things. So she just walks all around. She talks to people, she meets people. And she actually ends up becoming friends with one of his main suspects, although she doesn't realize that. So that puts her life in serious danger. And then in the new book, Death Rang the Bell, which is out now, she goes to 1934, travels to 1934 and goes to a Halloween party with Stephen. And later on, when they get home, she witnesses the murder of the man across the street, his neighbor, at his front door. And she thinks that the killer turned around and saw her face. So she's seriously in danger this time. She also accidentally comes across a piece of information that she wishes in one way she hadn't seen, but she feels like she has to act on it. So she takes a huge risk and breaks one of the big time travel rules. So that's all I'll say about that.
Thank you, Carol. John?
Sure. I'm the author of the Eli Marks mystery series, which is a series of 7 books and a couple short stories about a working magician, not a Harry Potter kind of magician, but a working magician who does birthday parties and corporate events and trade shows and that sort of thing. And he continually either finds himself at murder scenes or gets pulled into crime scenes, probably because he has, as his ex-wife says, a weird way of looking at the world. And it's that magician's brain that helps him figure out when misdirection is happening and when the truth is kind of just around the corner. The first book in the series is called The Ambitious Card. All the books are named after magic tricks, because magic tricks have great names like the Bullet Catch and the Miser's Dream and the Linking Rings. In The Ambitious Card, Eli is brought to a TV studio. They're doing a Halloween show. They have a mentalist psychic on who's doing readings of the audience. And Eli is brought in to be sort of the voice of the opposition and talk about how this isn't very, very real, and to show he can recreate what the psychic is doing just using magic tricks. It makes for sort of a tense scene between the two men, and it gets even worse when the psychic ends up dead the next morning, and he has in his pocket the playing card that Eli used in the card trick they did together. And so from that point on in the book, Eli is trying to clear his own name. I'll figure out who's not only killing this psychic, but as it turns out, a whole bunch of psychics in the Twin Cities. The books take place in Minneapolis, St. Paul, present day, and Harry is assisted by his uncle, who is a world-class magician. Think like a David Copperfield, but in his 80s. They run a magic shop together in the Twin Cities, and Harry knows everything about magic and magicians. Eli just knows sort of the tip of the iceberg, and so Harry turns out to be a great resource when it comes to solving not only that crime, but the other adventures they fall into in the other 6 books.
Thank you, John. So, John, Carol, both of you have this theme, or you tend to work with the paranormal elements of the story. So we've got magicians, we've got psychics, we've got quantum time travel, Einstein, science, not science. So this is also fascinating. I want to ask you about your inspiration. So what inspires you to write the way that you do? So, for example, Carol, was there any similar experience, any similar, if you want me to call it a paranormal experience, or something a little not normal that has happened with you or that you've heard of that sparked this series?
Yes, actually something very, very not normal happened. And I didn't talk about it for decades. When I was in my late 20s, I was in my first apartment living alone. I was teaching at the time, and I'm a very deep sleeper. It was a school night. It was the middle of the night. And all of a sudden, out of a deep, deep sound sleep, in a flash, I woke up, and my mind was like a second before my waking up. I woke up already scared. I knew that somebody was in the apartment. If you've ever lived alone, or if you live alone, I mean, there's a feeling of somebody else somehow in that space. So I very slowly and carefully turned around, opened my eyes, and there was a man standing at my bedroom door. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't have a heart attack on the spot. I was terrified. My heart was pounding. My brain was screaming, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this? And I was just paralyzed. I could not move. I keep a light on in the living room, and he was in a hallway, the bedroom door, then a hallway, then the living room. So the light was behind him. So there were shadows and stuff, and there was a light outside the window. So I could see little bits, parts of his face and stuff. He leaned in, looked at me, stood up, shook his head, and walked through the wall. So, oh my God, what is going on? I turned the light on, and I shook uncontrollably for at least a half hour. It happened 3 more nights. Well, I mean, I wasn't scared anymore for my physical safety, but I didn't know what was going on. By the 3rd night, I was kind of almost subconsciously ready for it, I think. He actually was a couple hours earlier. It was like 1 a.m. It happened again, and I was going to say something, and he disappeared again. On the 4th night, I was able to get the words out. I said, "Are you real?" And it never happened again. I basically just packed that away in the back of my mind, never told a soul for a long, long time. And when I decided to start writing mysteries, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if that was Einstein's theory? And I've always been fascinated by time travel, not in the future, but into the past. That interests me more. And so I thought, I'm just going to write a mystery because I love mysteries. That was a no-brainer. And I'm going to use this experience. So that's how Doorway to Murder opens. You know, Olivia, I became Olivia. And then the guy, it was almost like this doesn't make any sense, but I felt like I knew him. I can still picture him. 5'10", medium build, medium height, dark brown hair, Roman nose. I saw a profile. His name, Stephen, just came out of the blue. I knew what kind of person he was. A real dedicated cop, determined to get justice for his victims, find the killer no matter what. Very moral, but not, extremely so moral in an admirable way, I would say. Very cultured. He's not one of these rough around the edges, Sam Spade type 1930s cops. He's more like Inspector Allen or Murdoch or even Poirot, because he, uses his mind and powers of deduction and intelligence to kind of analyze things. So basically, yeah, that's exactly where the inspiration came from. I don't know what that all was, but I'm glad it happened because it gave me the idea for the series.
It is what it is. I mean, it is your inspiration, and actually it's probably the novel itself, It wants to make its way into the world, so it does it through you. That's amazing. Wow, that's an incredible story, Carol. And it must have been, must have taken up a lot of courage to speak about it a few decades later and to write about it, actually.
It actually did, because when the first book came out, I had some friends over for dinner. It was our card group. And afterwards, we sat in the living room for a while, just with finishing our wine and talking. And my friends said, you've been talking about this book for ages. Can you read us the first page or something? We're dying to read it. And so I did, and they said, "Oh my God, where'd you get that idea?" And I told them, and they said, "Never, ever tell anybody that experience. They will think you're nuts." But, I don't do drugs. I wasn't drunk. It just happened, so whatever it was, it was.
Yeah, and it made its way into your novels. It materialized eventually, so it became in your novels. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And John, how about the debunker in you? Or are you a debunker? Or are you a magician that debunks magic, like Eli in the mysteries that you write?
Well, my story is not nearly as interesting as Carol's. It's much more prosaic, I guess. I am not a magician. I can do one magic trick, sort of. Haven't done it for a while. But I wanted to write a series. I enjoy mysteries. And I realized that I had a lot more magicians in my life than most people. I was involved in corporate entertainment for years, booking talent for meetings and events for large corporations, and had met a lot of magicians. And so knew them pretty well, and knew that they're quirky and interesting. And generally, the better magicians are really, really, really smart. And I thought that would make a very good basis for a series, because it's a character that ends up in a lot of different environments and who has some special skills. So that makes him kind of fun and interesting. The whole debunking thing is a big part of the first book, The Ambitious Card. And it is based sort of on probably the best known magician in the world is Houdini, who was actually not a very good magician. He was an okay magician. He was a better escape artist and terrific promoter of himself. But toward the last half of his life, he did spend a lot of time because psychics were very big after World War I, because there had been so much death. Psychics really took off. And he spent a lot of time going to seances and debunking and proving that these people were not actually doing the things they said they were doing. His motive was really quite selfish because he wanted it to be true. He wanted there to be life after death. He was terribly attached to his mother and devastated by her death, and wanted to prove that there was a way to communicate, and was very upset that people were faking that and taking people's money. So that's certainly a part of Eli's character, but it isn't all of his character, because he is a working magician who has to make a living doing sort of a silly job. And he's also in his 30s and divorced and a little adrift in the first book. And he's also been raised, since his parents died when he was younger, raised by an uncle who was and is one of the best magicians in the world. And so he is a little neurotic about that, about not really being certainly as good as his uncle. One of the things people have said they like most about Eli is his flaws, because he is a little neurotic. He doesn't have a lot of self-confidence. He is often his own worst enemy. And that's what makes him an interesting and fun character.
Really is an interesting and fun character. And the novels, I mean, they have such a wonderful narrator's voice in it. So when Eli is saying the story, it's funny, it's smart, there's a lot of character in the narration as well. So
yeah, I'll just say that that is one of the hardest parts about writing a mystery. And I'm not really great at writing mysteries. The mystery portion of a book is very hard for me to do, because I don't have that sort of puzzle mind. And it is difficult writing first person mysteries, because you have to give the reader everything that Eli's getting. We share the same information that he has. And so you've got to be fair and lay everything out, and then do the reveal at the end and have it make sense. And so that's one of the harder parts of doing a first person mystery like that. When the other series I do, the Come Like Players mysteries, is third person, and it is a little bit easier to get in there and put in red herrings and things, because you just have that distance.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about distance. Do you feel that way? Do you feel, especially when when it's written in the first person, do you feel that you need to get into the shoes of a magician? Are you the magician when you're writing through a magician's voice?
I know enough that I can fake that pretty well.
Okay.
I can write two different voices. I can write the voice of a 33-year-old magician who's kind of okay, and I know enough and am cranky enough that I can write his uncle who's in his 80s. And those two voices are really easy. I can drop into those very easily and can write that sort of stuff. Stepping in other people's shoes is, always a little bit more difficult, but since everything is from Eli's point of view, I always have his perspective to look at it from, and it's pretty much my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how did Eli come to you?
Well, like I said, I wanted to write a series. I'm a big fan of, there's an author named Lawrence Block who has a number of different series. Probably his most famous is the Matthew Scudder mystery series, but he does a series about a burglar named Bernie Rodenbar, who runs a bookshop. And because he's a burglar, he stumbles into a lot of crime scenes. Some of them are crime scenes that he's in the midst of a crime. And that's how he gets involved in mysteries and murders. And I liked that idea of someone who ended up in places that most people don't end up. And I wanted someone who was kind of good at what he does, but not a Sherlock Holmes type. I think one of the problems with Sherlock Holmes for me is that, he is always right, and he always knows the answer, and he often knows it right away, which gets a little bit boring. So it's nice to have a character like Eli, who in the 7 books so far, he is wrong about as often as he's right. He figures out the mystery right toward the end, and I think half the times he's wrong and put in danger because he has come up with the wrong answer. And that's what I like about him. Because I knew so many magicians, it was easy to get up to speed on writing like a magician, so that anytime there was a question about how a particular trick was done, I could have Eli describe it in such a way that a magician reading the book would nod and say, yep, that's exactly how that's done, but would also be pleased with the fact that I'm not giving away how it's done, but the procedure that Eli's taking is the correct way of doing that. And once I started with that world, he is in so many different places. He's in a magic store. He's in the bar next door with his uncle and all his old magician friends. He's doing trade shows, cruise ships, traveling to London to be at the Magic Circle. There's so many different environments I can put him in that it's really been fun to just keep moving him around. It never gets dull.
That does sound like a lot of fun, actually. And I mean, it's incredible. The work is just really, really great. And Carol and John, in your novels, in both of your novels, I learned a lot. I did learn a lot about debunking a few magic tricks. I did learn a lot about forensics and stuff, you know, the police detective work, and a little bit of quantum physics maybe here and there. So I wanted to ask you, how much research do you put into your work? How much time does it take? Is it longer? I mean, the process of researching, is it longer than the writing process itself, or is it, you know, you do both at the same time? Do you learn as you write, or do you learn and then write? So how is it for you, Carol?
Kind of all of the above, I think. I put a lot of research into the books. First of all, I want the police procedures and the forensics to be accurate. I got very lucky. When I first started, I was working with the former Syracuse police chief, who has since passed away. But I also met a local county sheriff who's retired now, but he's also the county sheriff historian. So he knows police procedure, not just now, but over the last decades. That's been a huge help to me. So John always reads my manuscript, and he comments on where I did it right, where I'm off a little, where I have to completely change something if I need a warrant someplace and I didn't mention it. And he has given me some really terrific ideas too, which I incorporated and I think made it a better book. So that's my first step, to make sure that the procedures and the forensics are all accurate. I've been able to connect with a couple of poison experts. There's a woman in Texas who we call the Poison Lady. She comes to a lot of mystery writer conferences. She's a pharmacist, and her knowledge of poison is just like an encyclopedia. She's fabulous, and she is so generous with her time. So I'm building sort of, a team of people that I can turn to. In terms of the historical aspects, I want to get that right too. And although I don't think there are very many people right now who are alive who would remember, if they're alive, they were so young, but just my own sense of doing it right. I want to get all the details right. The first thing I do is go to the New York State Library in Albany, and I read all the newspapers, the New York Times and local papers. My books take place in an imaginary town in what we call the Mohawk Valley, which is kind of the middle of New York State, right at the foot of the Adirondack Mountains near the Mohawk River. So I read local papers of towns there. And I got really lucky with the second book, because I wanted Threshold of Deceit to take place during the last week of April, when typically around here, Little League starts their season. And I remember when I was young, there was a Little League parade that everybody in town, worked to their Sunday plans around this parade. And the streets were just filled with every single neighbor in the neighborhood. And I thought that since my victim was going to be killed outside at a picnic, actually, which I loved writing that scene, I would have the whole town at the parade so that everybody was there, but nobody saw it. And when I got to reading some of the newspapers during that week, I found out that John Dillon was being pursued by the feds, and they were actually amping up their pursuit of him. So that was perfect current events for my cops to talk about. Very exciting to be a cop, even though you're in a small town and not a part of it, but feeling a little bit shoulder to shoulder with the FBI hunting this big criminal. So I do the research in that. I check the weather. I have I was lucky. I found not, like we have TV guide. Back in the 30s, they had radio guides, a newspaper type magazine with all the radio shows of the week. So I know what Stephen can listen to, what time of day, and I was able to use that. I found it in a used bookstore. I could pick out like his favorite programs. In Syracuse, there are two things. There's a classic car museum not far from here. And also every summer we have what they call the Syracuse Nationals, which is this huge classic car show. We get thousands of people from all over the country and Canada who come here for several days with their classic cars. So I've gone over there. I introduce myself, I look for the late 20s and early 30s cars, introduce myself to the owners, tell them I'm doing research, and they've been great. They let me take pictures. I can sit in the car, honk the horn, look at the dashboard, the glove box, see what the seats are like. Some of them have started the cars for me so I can hear the muffler and how loud it would be. I do a ton of research, obviously clothes and advertisements and so forth. But I have to say that I love doing that. I get lost in it, and I have to always rein myself in and say, hey, you found the detail you needed. Now get back to the scene that you're writing. So that's been fun for me.
Yeah, and it's obvious. I mean, it's obvious how much heart you put in your work because, it reaches the readers. So we can sense that. We can sense how many, you've tapped into so many different disciplines in order to recreate this world in your novel. It's amazing. It's really great. And it's such a journey. I mean, the way you describe it, even the cars, sitting in the car is sort of like simulating the reality that you are creating in your novels. That's just wonderful. And is it the same for you, John?
Oh, I wish I was as ambitious and diligent as Carol on that. I have the advantage that I'm working in present day, so I don't need to worry about the details to that degree. But for the first book, I had to do a lot of research. I had to get up to speed on what does it mean to be a magician? What does it mean to be a working magician? What is your life like? And I also had to get a foot pretty firmly into the what is it like to be a psychic camp as well, because there's a lot of different subgroups in there. In order to get myself grounded in the magician world, I was very fortunate to have, because I'm in the Twin Cities, you think, well, how many magicians could there be here? There aren't that many, but there is a world-class award-winning magician named Suzanne the Magician, who lives a few miles from here. And I called her up and said, I want to learn how to do a card trick called the Ambitious Card. And she said, oh, sure, no problem. And we met every Saturday for a few months. And she kind of walked me through the procedure for how to do the Ambitious Card, which is a pretty simple trick. Whoever you're working with, your volunteer on stage signs their name on the face of the card, and you put it into the deck, and it keeps jumping to the top. No matter how you try to bury it in the deck, it keeps jumping to the top. Hence, it's an ambitious card. So I learned the steps and procedures for how to do that. But at the same time, I also learned what her life was like, because she is a working magician. She works at doing magic at a restaurant a couple nights a week. She goes to the Magic Castle for a couple of weeks out in LA every year and performs there. She does trade shows, she does parties. So I got a pretty good sense of what that world was like to help me build the first book, The Ambitious Card. Since then, it's sort of this constant, I don't want to say drone, but I keep trying to fill the hopper. It's sort of research where I'm sure Carol's gone through this as well. You're doing research, not knowing exactly what you're looking for, but you'll know it when you find it. And so that for me requires reading biographies of magicians, Thankfully, there's a lot of podcasts out there with magicians talking. So I learn about their lives that way. I've gone to conventions. The last book in the series, The Magic Square, takes place. I never named the convention, but any magician reading it would go, I know that's exactly Magi Fest and you're in Ohio, and I know exactly what hotel you're at. And, those details are correct, which is helpful. And the thing that's been most helpful, now that I have this friend, Suzanne, who, like I say, is a world-class magician, she knows all the other world-class magicians. And a couple of years ago, she said, I want to do a thing where I can bring some friends to town once a month. And the local theater scene, and you're obviously an organized person. Let's do a magic show. And so we started a thing called Sunday Night Magic. It's a little infrequent now, but it used to be once a month at a local theater. And she would bring in every month one of her friends to perform and to also do a lecture for local magicians. Now, if you're not a magician and you're just a normal person off the street, if I say to you, oh, we have John Carney or Max Maven or the late Eugene Berger coming, you have no idea who it is. If you're a magician, your head explodes. It's like, what? You have Max Maven coming to Minneapolis and I can talk to him? So that's just been really invaluable, sitting down one-on-one with these guys and women and finding out what their lives are like. And then, as I'm writing a story, I'm able to almost immediately incorporate these things, because Eli will be in a situation, or his Uncle Harry will have a thought about something. And for example, there's a thing called the too perfect theory, which is just a magic trick can't be too perfect, because if it is too perfect, then it's obviously a trick. And you have to put something in it to make it seem a little flawed. Maybe a dull conversation now, but among magicians, very heated. It's a very heated thing. And so I can, if someone brings that up in a book, Harry has an opinion on that, and I can write it because I've talked to people and I know the opinions. It's interesting for the mystery reader. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but for the magicians who are also mystery readers, that's like catnip. It's like, oh, wow, I'd love to hear what Harry has to say about that thing. So the research is ongoing. Before I hopped on here this morning, as I was doing some cleaning the cat boxes here in the house, I was listening to a podcast with magicians talking about what's going on in their lives. There was a podcast listened to about 3 days ago where they just, in passing, mentioned a variation on a trick, which was exactly what I needed for the story I'm working on right now. The exact right thing happened to be in the podcast I was listening to at the time. So because of that, I can't stop. In order to keep coming up with stuff, it's just going to be, as long as I'm reading Eli Marks, I'm going to be listening and reading and learning about magicians.
That's incredible. It's like you've met with people, you became one of them one way or the other. You practiced card tricks, you've been to conventions, you created this, once a month Sunday card ritual thing. You enjoyed it so much in real life. So this is really, maybe the magician in you. I'm surprised how you still don't call yourself a magician.
Well, there is argument about that. I have had magicians say to me that I'm technically a magician because I know that much.
Yeah, you sound one.
There was a magician out of Chicago who died a couple of years ago, a very wonderful magician named Eugene Berger, who was sort of the basis for the Uncle Harry character. And he was famous for saying there are many rooms in the house of magic, which means in one room you find performers, another room you're going to find historians, another room you're going to find people who are just amateurs who just want to have a trick to learn to show their friends. And I'm able to move from room to room. The other thing that's interesting about the magic world, and I suppose it's probably true of other little niche worlds, I just hadn't experienced it, is it's very small. And once you kind of know the magic word, where people know that you're serious about what you're doing, with the exception of maybe a David Copperfield, you can get in touch with any of these magicians. And, and I have, when I've had a question, I can just drop an email and get an email back with a response from them, or get them on the phone. I started a podcast to talk to magicians about the stuff in the Eli Marks books, because there's a lot of, I just touch on things in the books, and you can go into a lot more depth. And so the podcast allows a listener to listen to a chapter from the book, and over the course of the season, they'll hear the whole book. But they also hear interviews with magicians or other experts, going into a little bit of depth about the stuff explored in that chapter. It's a very rich field, and it is so accessible. Once you get in the door, magicians are just really, really open about their work.
Oh, that's great to know. And I'm wondering, did this start with the onset of writing the Eli Marks mystery? So is it like, okay, I want to know more about magicians, or I want to write a novel about a magician, and that's how it all started? Or was it something before? Like, was it a hobby or a curiosity that you had before writing the book? So which one came first?
I don't know, chicken, egg, I don't know. I was never really interested in doing magic. Like I said, I had a number of friends who were either full-time professional magicians or amateur magicians. And most people probably don't even know one magician. I probably knew 6, which is a lot of magicians to know. So I wasn't interested in performing it. I really didn't go see magic, but I knew a little bit about it. But as soon as I realized that this was the character I wanted to pursue, in order to do it properly, I just had to get in. As a result, I've gone to conventions, I've read all different kinds of things. But at a certain point, all I'm looking for is ideas that'll help Eli be a better, more interesting character. I've sort of gotten past the how is that done phase, which a lot of amateur magicians never get out of that. They just, how is that one done? How is that one done? And there's a whole industry on getting people excited about a new trick, and then they pay $20 to $80 and they learn the secret. They're paying for the secrets. I got past that because some of the best tricks I ever saw, when I learned how they were done, it was so simple and it was stupid how simple they were, that the correlation, I didn't need to know. It just didn't matter anymore how it was done. I mean, I might be a little bit curious about it, but I didn't have to dig anymore because I'm not going to perform it. I just don't need to know, unless Eli needs to know for a particular reason how something's done. For example, the second book of the series is called The Bullet Catch. And the bullet catch is a very famous, deadly trick that a dozen magicians or more have died performing. And its simplicity itself, a name is etched on a bullet, it's put in a gun, it's pointed at the magician, often with a plate of glass between them, so you can be sure that the bullet was fired. The bullet is fired, the glass explodes, and the magician catches the bullet in his mouth. That's a bullet catch. A lot of different ways you can do that trick. And in the book, Eli comes up with his own way of doing the trick, but I have no idea what it was. I didn't need to know. I just needed to know that he was smart enough to come up with his own way of doing it. There's other tricks in the book that I do have to know how they're done in order to make the mystery work. In that particular instance, it didn't matter. I knew enough to get him through it.
That's very interesting. So it's a combination of the story unfolding and your curiosity about, this whole setting of a magician's world. Wow.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world, and they're very interesting people.
So curious to know also about your journey. How did you both start publishing your work? So how was it like? Was it easy? Were there rejections? How is it like finding a publisher? Did you do it on your own? Did you get any help? So Carol, how was it like for you?
Well, I've had a variety of things. The first thing I ever wrote was a magazine article. And I had this memory sort of floating around of when my mother took my sister and me school shopping the summer before I was 15. And I had worked some jobs that summer and had money to spend of my own for the very first time. And it was really exciting. And the memory, so many years ago was still vivid. And I wanted to write it down. At the time, I was I had a subscription to Victoria magazine, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a woman's magazine, but it's very gentle, sort of, Victorian times throwback. It has all the usual articles you find and features of a woman's magazine. But what it has is a feature called Chimes, and that's basically a memoir. And for the people who who read this magazine, that's the first thing you look for. It's always on the last page of the magazine, and you jump right to it. So I sat down and I wrote the memoir. And oh, the feeling of satisfaction and contentment and happiness that just washed over me. I thought, oh my God, I love this. And wouldn't it be cool if this was actually published? So I sent it in late afternoon one day. This was after I retired. I was 60 by the time I did that. The next morning, I mean, less than 24 hours later, the editor of the magazine called me and said, oh my God, where have you been writing? Where have you been publishing? Yes, we're going to buy this. We want you to write more and more and more. So that experience completely set me up for wrong expectations in publishing a book. I thought, wow, well, you know, I will, I decided I wanted to start writing novels because I wanted more. I didn't want to just do magazine articles. I wanted to be able to create stuff and live with characters and, you know, be in that world for a while. So after I finished the first book, and by the way, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything about writing a book. I just thought, I've got a really good story and, you know, here it is. So I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything about writing mysteries. So I read it over a few times and moved a few commas around and changed a few things. And I thought, okay, I'm ready. So I sent it out to some agents because that's what I thought you did. And most of them didn't reply, which of course is, I've since learned that's very normal. And about a half a dozen or so actually wrote me back a personal letter, which I was very grateful for. And they all said they loved the idea. They thought it was great. Nobody else is writing anything like this, but my manuscript needed some work. And even then, I didn't know what that meant. So fast forward a couple of years, and in 2013, I made the best decision ever. I joined Sisters in Crime. That is, it's like MWA. It's a professional crime writers organization with thousands of members in the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And my chapter is Albany, which is about a 3-hour drive from me. We meet once a month. So once I started going to meetings and meeting people and learning the craft and finding out there were conferences to go to and workshops I could attend and learning, I saw, oh, this is what they mean about, you know, working on the manuscript, editing and so forth. So I got lucky, and one of the speakers at our monthly meeting was a woman who is a published author, and she is on the board of an author's co-op. It's called Bridal Path Press, Bridal Path Books. I forgot now. Anyway, so it sounded interesting. It was something that I thought maybe was attainable. And at the time, I just wanted to do anything to get this book published. And I didn't mind paying some of the costs myself. They have a business model where you pay for some things, you get some things where you don't have to pay, and then your book is published. So I thought that was fine with me. And she recused herself, and I sent it in, and 3 of the board members read it and accepted it. And then I started going through the process of learning how to edit and learning some of the guidelines that you're supposed to know about mysteries, and some technical things too, simple things like formatting. I mean, at the time, I was still putting 2 spaces after a period before the next sentence, and things had changed, and I was basing, you know, my technical written stuff on college 50 years ago. So I started learning a lot of stuff. So after that first book came out, everything was great. I was happy with it, but I knew that I always wanted to be with a traditional press. And by this time, I had learned that a lot of people don't have agents, and you don't need an agent unless you want to go for one of the top 5 big publishers. And I was a little uncomfortable with that. I thought I would like something smaller where maybe I would actually, get to know my editor a little bit. So again, I, was working on the second book. I spent all of 2018 sending query letters to publishers. I vetted over 600 publishers. It took months. And, you look them up online and maybe you don't know, maybe you can tell from the name or maybe you can't, but you got to go through and, you might spend 10, 15 minutes on their website until finally you see they only do cookbooks and children's books or something, and okay, well, there's a half hour wasted. They say that if you send out 100 query letters, by that time you will, get a yes. And I thought, oh my goodness, I was already 63, 64 by then. And I thought, I have a 7-book series. I don't have time to send out 100 letters and take 2-3 years. So I got lucky. I sent a query letter in March to Level Best Books. And in December, which by the way, most of the people never answer you back. They will say on their website, after 6 to 9 months, if you don't hear from us, consider it a pass. Which, I say hire some more staff and be a little more courteous. That would be really nice because you sit there for 6 to 9 months in limbo, which I found very uncomfortable. Anyway, so in December, Level Best Books said, we're interested in reading this and send us some more. And in January of 2019, I got a contract with them. They're a small press outside Washington, D.C. 3 lovely ladies who own this company. They're very approachable. They want their authors to be happy. And I've been really happy with the experience. They're a traditional press. They're very supportive. I've been allowed to have some input on some of my covers, which is quite unusual. They allowed me to keep my titles, which was important to me. So it's been a really wonderful experience. So there you have it.
That's great. I mean, finally you found a publisher that you are comfortable with and that you can communicate with smoothly. Wow, that's a great story, Carol. John, did you have a similar experience with publishing?
A lot of the things I ran into are exactly what Carol experienced, particularly the long waits to hear back, which I agree is unconscionable. I don't understand why that business is allowed to say, yeah, you've got to give us your manuscript review for 9 months and then we'll let you know. It's very silly. My path in was pretty typical. Since a teenager, I've been making low budget feature films. So I had a background in writing. So I'd write all the scripts. So I knew about writing. And I had an idea occur to me for a story, and I realized it would make a better book than a movie. So I sat down and wrote it as a novel. It's called The Ripperologists, and it's about someone recreating Jack the Ripper's crimes in present day New York, and 2 experts on Jack the Ripper who have to work together to help solve the crimes before this copycat completes all 5 murders. And as Carol did, I did research. I sent to agents. I was lucky enough to get a pretty good agent early on, and bless her heart, she shopped it around for a year. And some people liked it, but nobody wanted to buy it. And then she said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going on maternity leave. Nobody else here wants it. So I found another agent, and she did some shopping around, and she found people who did want to produce it. However, it was a new company and they were just horrible. And we got about halfway through the process and I just pulled the plug and said, you don't know what you're doing. Your covers are terrible. Your editing is terrible. I don't know how you've made it in this business. And as it turned out, they didn't last for very long. And so I had this book that nobody wanted and this new idea about writing Eli Marks. And so I wrote that and thought, well, I'm going to skip that whole process. I'm just going to write the book and see that I like it and not worry about the rest of it at this point. to make the process fun. And I happened to be reading a review in Mystery Scene magazine of a book that wasn't my book, but the sense of humor seemed about the same. And I got the sense, oh, whoever published this would like this book. And I looked up the name of the publisher and I sent them in a query email. And about 2 days later, I got an email back saying, would love to read it. We have a big stack of manuscripts here, but I'll get to it when I can. And 4 days later, she called me up and said, I want to buy the book, which doesn't ever really happen, but it did happen in this case. And so they bought that first one. They wanted to do a contract with a book a year. And because at that point I was making my living as a corporate entertainment booker and video producer and writer, I didn't want to be on anyone's schedule. I wanted to write when I wanted to write. So I said, no, I'll give you the books when they're done, but we'll just do one at a time, which is a nice way to work because you don't have a lot of pressure. But because they were a publishing house, even though they weren't huge, they did have a schedule. So when I'd finish a book and send it, they'd say, great, this will be out a year from now, which I got a little tired of. That's, Carol and I are, I think, about the same age. And, you look at the clock and you go, I don't want to wait a year. The book's done now. Let's go now. And at that point, self-publishing was becoming much more of a thing. They had done 4 of the books. And I just emailed them and said, you guys don't seem to be getting a lot of traction with these. I think I could probably market them better. Can I have my rights back? And I named the right number and they gave them back. And I had found a great design company in England. And within a couple of weeks, the books were back on the market with new covers. And I've since added 3 more books and have another one coming. And so the process of moving from a traditional publisher to self-publishing was a very good one. It was relatively easy just because I was researching self-publishing the same way I research magicians, and I learned enough to get up and running and then keep learning and keep changing and adapting. So if I'm not listening to a magic podcast, I'm listening to a publishing podcast because it's the same thing. You got to keep learning and doing stuff. But that's been, what is it now? A year and a half, 2 years, a little over 2 years. And the books are doing great. They're doing far better than they ever did when they were traditionally published. And I'm getting a whole lot more of the income from it because as a traditional publisher, you don't really get a big chunk of that money, which you can as a self-publisher. So it's been a long journey. A lot of the things Carol said were exactly what happened to me. The researching publishers it just took forever and they never got back to you. And it was very frustrating. And having that all behind me and now being in charge of, when I finish a book, literally when I finish a book, when I'm done and I'm happy, it can be out on Amazon and Kobo and Barnes and Noble and all those places within a couple of days. And I'm not waiting a year. So it's a much better process.
Wow. I mean, it's amazing how one book is a testimony to, so much that you had to learn in order to have it encouraged into existence. You learn a lot about publishing. You learn a lot about your characters. In a way, you get to meet them in real life and make them part of your daily life as well. And wow, I mean, there's just so much to put into a novel. It's more than sitting there and writing and imagining what to write about next, or plotting and then going according to the blueprint that you made. Wow. I mean, what a journey. And I wanted to ask, is there anything, or are there some things that you wished you had known before you started writing a novel? So Carol, for example, you said that there were so many things that you didn't know what you were doing. You just did it. Anything that you wished that you knew?
Yeah, I think I wish I had known about Sisters in Crime a couple of years earlier because, although when I was writing the first book, there was no deadline or anything, and I can enjoy every single second, take as long as I want with the research and sitting there looking at a paragraph or whatever. I spent my life with French literature, so I was picturing, just like Balzac sitting in an attic in Paris while the snow is falling, and then the brakes, you put on the brakes, screech, whoa, wait a second, you don't know what you're doing, you need help. So what Sisters Masters in Crime did, you need other writers, and you need them on so many different levels. First of all, you need friends to be able to commiserate with, like when you're going through that querying process. I wish, there had been some people going through it at the same time to help relieve the stress. You need friends to ask questions about in terms of, well, here's an example. Okay, shortly after I joined my chapter, BoucherCon was going to be held in Albany. BoucherCon is the #1 largest mystery conference that's held every year. It's like the Olympics where cities bid on it, so it moves around. And that particular year it was in Albany. So I immediately signed up. So I was still working on, revising that first book, Doorway to Murder. One of the first people I met was Louise Penny. And I had just finished reading her first book, Still Life. So I knew who she was and loved her writing. And so we were standing there talking, chit chat. And she said, are you a writer? What are you writing? And I told her, and I was having trouble with something in particular in chapter 3, which is when the investigation starts, the investigation into the murder. And so I told her, and she said, oh, we all have that problem. This is what I do. And she gave me 3 fantastic ideas to pick from. And one of them worked for me. And I thought, oh my God, here is this like goddess of mystery writing. Not only is she being nice, taking time to talk with me, who like a total nobody, but she's giving me the secret to chapter 3. And it's been exactly like that ever since. Everybody I have met in the mystery writing community has been nice, generous with their time, gracious. I haven't seen any like backstabbing. Everybody seems genuinely interested in your success. That, oh, if I can ever do anything to help you, oh, gee, I'll be happy to blurb your book. Oh, you should meet so-and-so. It's like a family. It really is wonderful. And you can't do it alone. So there's that wonderful family feeling among people. And then there's the practical aspects of making contacts like the poison lady that I mentioned, and attending conferences, doing workshops, learning the craft. That's invaluable. And actually, since the pandemic, Jane Cleland is a wonderful and highly successful mystery writer. She also teaches at one of the colleges in New York City. She has generously given her time. Every single month, she has a free workshop on Zoom, free, where she picks a topic and gives you all her secrets and how can you do this and that and so forth. It's been wonderful. So I wish I had joined a couple years earlier, but I'm very thankful that I've joined now. Everybody's been wonderful and very welcoming.
Wow. That's what's so wonderful about the sense of community, about creative communities in general. People are so supportive. And as you said, Carol, it does give a sense of family. Yeah. And yes, it's very important to, you just gave everybody so many writers who don't belong or who are not affiliated with a, specific writing community, just gave them an idea that, yes, being part of community, especially in the beginning, is really helpful in kickstarting your writing career or journey. We spoke a little bit about this when we had Dr. Steve Kellner a couple of weeks ago on Indelible Evenings as well. So he spoke about the different types of motivation. And one of those types is motivation by affiliation. So when you are affiliated with a group of like-minded people who share similar interests, who are on the same boat, in the same boat as you, it's it could really do a lot for your work. So, John, how about you? What did you wish you had known when you first started writing?
Um, well, when it came to being published, I wished that I had known. Carol mentioned that she has input on her covers when I was traditionally published. I didn't really have input. And the first cover for the first book was very nice and worked very well for that story, but I didn't realize that they would be kind of cartoony for all books going forward. That look worked for the first one, didn't work for subsequent ones. And I was sort of locked into that. And because I didn't have any say, I had to kind of go along with that. And covers, as I've learned, are tremendously important. Because if you're scanning through books, you don't know who the writer is. If the cover catches your eye, you might be drawn into learning more about it. And so that was something I wished I had a better handle on when I started, that the covers are not only really, really important, but if you're writing a series, there's you need a shared look throughout. And you need to know going in, okay, that's, if I pick that look, I've got to find a way to make that work for the next 6 books.
So we can judge a book by its cover?
People do. That's, what I've learned from in self-publishing the last couple of years is first it's your cover and then it's your blurb. And this is only if you're dealing with someone who knows nothing about your book and might have popped up on Amazon under a search. If the cover doesn't look professional, and people don't even know what that means, but they know when they see it. If it doesn't grab their eye, and then if the first few sentences of your blurb don't grab their attention, they're just going to move on because there are a lot of other choices out there.
Interesting. Do you agree, Carol?
Yeah, I think there's a range, I've seen covers that tell you absolutely nothing. I mean, I own all the Agatha Christie books, and I realized a while back that there was one I was missing. So Harper's reissuing them all, and I bought it because I wanted to have all of them. It was Death in the Clouds. And when I got it, I know the story because I've read it, and I've, seen PBS Mystery, the version of it with Poirot. But in any case, this cover, Death in the Clouds, it's a blue sky with a lot of clouds, and then a huge oversized wasp. Well, yes, there's a wasp in the book, but the cover doesn't tell you anything. I mean, it supports the title, but that's it. And then there's the other extreme, which the cover really does inform anyone who picks it up, like my new one. I mean, I am in love with my new cover. It's exactly what I wanted. It's a Halloween mystery. It's got the orange and the black, the Olivia witnessing the murder, and then the smoking gun, and it draws you in. I mean, like I said, I'm in love with this cover. So you've got those two ends, and then you've got, everything in the middle. I have to say I wasn't in love with my second cover because the artist made Stephen look too rough. He looks more gangstery. And, I made a comment, but, nothing happened. So unfortunately, that's the way that is. But it's a shame because I do think people, I know I do. That's what makes me pick a book up. If I don't know an author, if it's not a series I'm used to reading, it's the cover that makes me pick it up. Then I flip it over and look at the summary to see, and then I'll, go to the first page and check the writing. But yeah, I think people do judge a book by its cover.
I mean, yeah, it happens. That's especially children. So we do that ever since we're kids. We look at the cover that we like, and then accordingly we make the decision.
Yeah.
Well, so John and Carol, speaking of book covers, I am going to share my screen now to show some book covers for your work. Okay, let me know. Can you all see? Need to enlarge the screen here. Oh, it doesn't. Yeah, it does now. So can you all see? These are John's books.
Actually, I'm looking at two of mine with some other stuff.
Mhm.
I
Oh,
can't.
is
Yeah, I'm
that what
seeing a
you
bunch
see?
of stuff on the screen. There's a bunch of
There's-
stuff on the screen.
Oh, they're
okay, you can't
small.
see.
I can't
Oh,
see that.
ooh. Okay, let me try again. I don't know what happened. How about now?
There you go.
Yep, that's
Okay,
the Eli Marks series right there. The 7
Those
books
are
in the
great
series.
covers.
that's
Yes,
the Eli.
it's a company in London called Design for Writers, and Andrew over there uh, really understood the feel of the stories, and uh, there are
Mhm.
clues on the cover if you look for them. If you don't, that's fine too. But yeah, you can tell they're all part of a series, but each one has its own little nice individual look to it.
I like everything about those. I like the font, the title of the trick with the item that represents that. They're intriguing. They draw me in. Those are great.
Yeah, I'm real happy with
Yeah,
them.
they are. They really are great. And they tell. I mean, at least the first one, the one that I read, I could tell from the cover a little bit about the book. And now I'm going to share. Could you see it or no? Okay, yeah. Right, here it is. This is one of Carol's books.
Yeah,
Can you
that's the
see it?
second one. Yeah, that's the second one.
It's the second book, Threshold of Deceit. And the thing is, I will need to stop and then go to the other one so that we don't go back to the tiny versions of the books. Okay, now I should be able to have it maximized. Okay, and this is the book that started it all, Doorway to Murder, the first in the series.
Yeah, I really liked that one. Olivia's a runner and she does kickboxing, so she's slender, and you can tell she's modern day from the clothes and the hair, and then the bank entrance, and also representing a doorway, and with the 1930s car, and you can see this guy with the fedora, representing the 30s. She's looking back in time. Yeah, I really liked that one. I thought that was a good job.
Yeah, and the font absolutely says this is 30s.
Yeah, Art
I think it might even
Deco.
be the
Yeah,
same. It might be the same font they use for the film Murder on the Orient Express. Looks very similar to that look, which has that timeless feeling.
Yeah, I
that
asked for an Art Deco
is.
font, and that was what he suggested. Yeah,
It's really nice. And I like the brush stroke, especially on the hair, the ones in white.
yeah.
Okay, so these are all pretty cool covers. And thank you once again, Carol and John, for sharing your wonderful experience with us.
Thank you.
And books. We still have around 20 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to go through the chat box. Okay, I'll mention the name, and then if you feel like you would like to use the microphone, please feel free to use the microphone and ask the question yourself, or add something to the answer. So first we start with Glenda. Glenda, yes, there you are, Glenda. Around 1970, my flatmate in Manhattan was a young Geoffrey Sheridan, an astonishing magician who later moved to Germany and became world renowned. I made short films about him, but gave him the only copies. He may be on YouTube. Wow, thanks for sharing that with us, Glenda. Thank you. Do you know him in any way, John? Since
I
you know
have
so
not.
many.
I'm surprised I haven't heard of him, but there are so many out there that I haven't heard of that I learn new names every day.
All right, and the second question is from Grace Topping. Hello, Grace. It's lovely to have you with us again. A wonderful author herself. Grace is asking, John, if pushed to do so, could you do a magic show?
I could not, but I could book a really good magic show because I have emails of the top magicians in the country. So if you're looking for someone to perform, I can tell you who you should go to.
All right, well, that's fair enough. And Glenda, again, I wonder, John, if you okay, yeah, we asked that before, if you've come across Jeffrey. And okay, we have a few comments. Interesting topic. Good evening. Adim is asking, do you always put yourself in the place of the main character to keep on going with the novel? I'm guessing this is a question for both of you.
Well, I don't put myself, I try to put myself in the mind of Stephen and Olivia, but since they're two very different characters, they have very different voices, to say nothing of the language being used in 1934 versus now. So I try to get in the head of each character. So when they're talking, they sound like that person. So you almost don't need to read so-and-so said. But beyond that, although I have to say, I was so deeply, deeply involved when I was writing Doorway to Murder. I walk every day, and it was the middle of winter, and I hit a day that was 20 below, and I didn't want to walk outside. So there's a mall nearby, and I thought I'll go walk in the mall today. And I was thinking about what I was going to write that afternoon when I came home. And I was in Stephen's head, and I walked by a Victoria's Secret, and I went, oh, Stephen, we'd be so shocked to see those windows, all the underwear and stuff. So when I'm really deep into the writing, I find myself in multiple heads, depending on the scene that I'm writing each day. So there's my answer.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I'm very much in Eli's head, and he's very much in my head, because I'm writing from a single point of view. It makes it a little easier. So I know exactly what he's feeling. I found that since we started producing audiobooks of the series, and I have a great narrator named Jim Cunningham, who also co-hosts my podcast with me, Jim really gets the voice of Eli and really gets the voice of Uncle Harry. And so I find now when I'm writing, I'm not so much hearing my voice, I'm hearing the voice of my narrator, Jim. So I'm writing for his rhythms, so that when you do hear the audiobooks, and I encourage people, if you get the chance, listen to the audiobook instead of reading the book, because he does such a good job that I think he really brings Eli to life.
Oh. And by the way, on the topic of audiobooks, we will be having soon, within the next few months, a special session on Indelible Evenings that is dedicated to the whole process of creating audiobooks. Thanks to Grace Topping, who suggested this topic. So thank you again, Grace. And next, right, where are we? Grace. Carol gives a real sense of the 1930s, so much so you feel you want to visit there. Absolutely, I totally agree.
Thank you, Grace.
And Grace is asking John, have you ever been challenged by a magician that you got something wrong? Oh.
No, I did get challenged by a reader that I got a scientific thing wrong. In the first book, our hero and his love interest are trapped in what are called the Wabasha Caves here in the Twin Cities. And it's a series of caves that runs for several miles along the riverfront. And people have died in there because they go in and they light fires, and then they die of carbon monoxide poisoning. And a reader very insistently reached out and said, no, in the caves they would die of carbon dioxide poisoning. And I wrote back and said, well, if they were in a sealed room, yes, they would die of that, but they're not in a sealed room. They're in a sealed cave, and there is air coming in because there's bats in there. We've established there's animals in there. They're dying of carbon monoxide. And he wrote back, and he doesn't think I'm right. And because I'm a self-published author, I thought, well, I don't want to get any more emails like this. I just went in and rewrote that little section of the ambitious card where Eli gets in an argument with the killer about that very topic, about how he's going to die when he puts him in the caves. And the killer thinks he's going to die of carbon dioxide. And Eli corrects him, which is a weird thing to do when someone's about to kill you. To say, no, you're not killing me this way, you're killing me that way. But generally, because I've researched the magic before writing it, and because I have a couple really good magician friends who read the books before they're published. Any sort of magic errors so far, knock wood, have been caught before they've been published.
That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting how much you learn after you get published. So you learned a scientific fact.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, and Yensid is asking, why don't you like or don't call yourself a magician?
Because if you say you're a magician to someone, their next question is going to be, show me a trick. And I really only have one trick and I don't carry it around. I think the generic term magician means you're a performer. And I'm certainly a magic aficionado. I'm not a magic historian. There are people who would call themselves magic historians. I am not that. I'm not even an amateur magician because I don't, except for one trick, that's what I don't do. I don't have any real strong emotional feelings about being called a magician. It just, I think it sets up an expectation that I can't fulfill.
So you've never pulled a rabbit out of a hat?
That is actually one of the hardest tricks in magic to do. It's really quite difficult.
All right. So it looks like you know how to do it, at least. I mean, you know about the process, how it's done.
I know
The
one way to do
instruction.
it. Yeah, there's several ways to do it, and I know one of them.
Right. Okay. We have a question from Steve Fisher. Carol, then John. Can you give us an idea of how you create the theme and plot outline for a novel?
Okay. Well, I'm very detail oriented. All my books so far have started with my characters, and then the murder mystery part of it comes along with that. I start out by I have a character dossier that I create for all the primary and secondary characters. I have their address. I've got a big map on a door in my office that I made up of town. So I have everybody's house and the street number and stuff, because I want to know, where they're going when they go places. I have their birthday. In Death Rang the Bell, that was very important because I had timelines going on several major characters that I had to be careful, dovetailed properly. So I create the character file in each person, their loves, their hates, what they fear most in life, what they want most in life, hobbies, favorite everything, family, school history, work history. I have everything. I put pictures in it, their clothes, their cars, everything, so that when I'm writing, I can jump back to it if I've forgotten a detail. So once I've got the characters, usually the characters lead me to what kind of murder mystery plot this is going to be. So I have the outline for the actual murder mystery. I type up a page for each chapter, and I note any historical details I want to put in, clues, red herrings where I want to put those in, basically what's going on in that particular scene. I also have like a long piece of paper. I tape a bunch of papers together so I can see 20 chapters at a time, and I jot things down, and then I color code it wherever there's emotional action, physical action, or like a high point in some way, red, so I can see, so I can make sure that there's action all through. So I'll have that, I'll write out the first plot line, then I usually have a secondary one, maybe a second murder, or like with the first one, there's a bank robbery. So I'll write that out. Then the third, there's always a time travel plot line. What am I going to do with time travel this time? What experiments are Stephen and Olivia up to in their progress of time travel? What characters do I bring in with that in both time periods or just one? How does it affect both time periods? Then the fourth, I have the relationship arc with Stephen and Olivia. Like I said, I have 7 books in mind. I know exactly how the series ends in book 7. I knew when I started, so I know where they have to be in each book to get to 7. So once I have all that all over my desk, I detail up to about halfway. Then I stop and I start writing. I work in the research and so forth and so on. And every single time so far, by either 2/3 of the way through or the end, I realized that the person I had planned on being the murderer, the killer, was not the person who did it. Either I realized, oh my goodness, that doesn't fit in the character that I made up with him. This person is really the person who did it, or something along those lines. That is my absolute favorite part of writing. Once you get these characters set up and they have to be true to themselves, the way you set them up, they take on a life of their own. I find myself typing things that they're saying that I didn't know they were going to say. I find them doing things that make total sense, but I didn't see it when I was making my outline. So I just kind of fly by the seat of my pants, the rest of the way through. And, it all sort of falls into place. Then, of course, I go over it like a million times, checking all my details. And a lot of times, actually, with Death Rang the Bell, I was all the way through it and I realized I had made a mistake and I had to go back and make enormous changes. You move huge blocks of text around, delete, entire chapters. But I enjoy that editing part. So anyway, so I start very organized and detailed and then just fly with it. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Carol. John?
Carol is once again far more, I feel like a slacker compared to that, because I don't put in nearly that much work. The biggest thing for me always is the mystery. What was the crime and who did it and how did they get away with it? And that's the hardest part. And that's what I spend really the most time on before I even start any kind of writing is, what happened and who did it and how did they do it? And how will Eli figure that out? Once that's in place, then I start looking for what's going on with Eli. What's, in the first book is all about guilt. And he's going through guilt. The second book, he is having panic attacks. So that is woven in. Figuring out where Eli is in his life. Once I've got that, then it's just a question of, without the level of detail that Carol does, I just have a general idea for the first 2/3 of the story of who are the red herrings, who's the second victim. That's sort of plotted out. And I've found after 7 of them now that the last third, I know how it ends. I know the situation Eli gets into, but I leave that sort of loosey-goosey because, as she said, they sometimes just kind of go off on their own and they have ideas what they want to say or what they don't want to do. And you need to adjust for that. So I'm not exactly a pantser, which is what they call people who write by the seat of their pants. I'm kind of a plotter, but I leave a lot of loosey-goosiness in the last third.
Nice, interesting. We have a question from a question by Dr. Alan Hickman, who is asking both, I assume. What contemporary mystery writers do you read? So, any incredible names that you would like to suggest?
I love. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Carol. All right, I'll do a quick. Mine's pretty fast. I mentioned Lawrence Block as being a favorite. His Keller series about a hitman is just great. And lately, I've been reading a lot of Anthony Horowitz, who I've yet to fully understand any of his books by the time I get to the end, because the mysteries are so convoluted and clever. I appreciate what he's able to do. I just look at it and go, I have no idea how he came up with that and all those details. So he's kind of my favorite right now.
Yeah, I like Anthony Horowitz too. I watched all the Midsummer Murders and Foyle's War that he had on PBS. He's a fabulous writer and prolific. I can't believe how much he produces and such high quality. By the way, I just saw a note in the chat from Bill. Thank you so much. He said, it appears my website is down. I don't, it was up this morning. I don't know what's going on, but when we get off, I will look into it and make sure that is fixed ASAP. So Bill, thanks a lot for saying that. I love Martha Grimes' Richard Jury series. She's American, but they take place in England, well, Britain. Each title is the name of a real pub, which I've been to a number of them, which was fun to add into trips to England. They're great. They're funny. They're clever. Awesome characters. I love that series. Martha Grimes. I also like Deborah Cromby. She's one of my favorite contemporary writers. This is also a British series. There's a theme going on here. I've actually gotten into reading some YA books lately. I think I'm going to write a YA series when I'm done with these 7. There's a, again, British writer. Her name is Robin Stevens, and she writes a series, Murder Most Unladylike. 2 young girls in a boarding school in the 30s. One girl's from Hong Kong, one is a British girl. And they've actually, like the Harry Potter books, they've taken off among adults. They're extremely well written. She loves Agatha Christie, and there's an homage to Agatha Christie in a couple of the books. One is a murder that takes place on the Orient Express. Very, very well written, terrific characters, well developed, and very entertaining. I mean, you know, the fact that the girls are 13, 14, 15 years old, if you put that aside, it's really like reading an adult book. She doesn't, you know, dummy down the language or anything like that. So that's what I'm reading lately. And Anthony Horowitz as well.
Great, thank you for the suggestions, Carol and John. We have a comment from Paula Messina. Paula says, we flesh and blood are the covers we shouldn't judge, not until we've learned what's inside. And Glenda agrees with Paula and says, yes, Paula. Then she says, the saying is a metaphor, like the pot calling the kettle black on projecting our flaws onto others. And we have a question a little further up. Let me just go back to it. Yes. By Abdullah. Abdullah is asking, Carol, how do you respond to people who say that time travel stories, especially the ones to the past, are amateurish and generally bad because of all the loopholes and paradoxes involved in the complex world of time travel?
Oh, I never heard anybody say that, but I'm a mystery writer. I write fiction. I'm not a quantum physicist. I don't read science fiction. I don't care for science fiction. I did enough research to, and the way I am writing, you know, you pick up a book, you suspend disbelief. And I think, well, like the Harry Potter books, you know, we don't have invisibility cloaks. We can't walk through the platform, you know, the wall platform 9 3/4. But I didn't have any trouble tumbling into those books. It was a joy to read the magic and read those wonderful stories. So I have enough, I've sort of created my own little, this is how time travel works in my books. Very basic, very simple. There's a portal. You know, they're the only 2 people at this point that seem to have this talent. Honestly, personally, I look at what we can do nowadays that they couldn't even dream of centuries ago. And I think centuries in the future, who knows, you know, maybe we will be able to see those portals that could possibly exist here and there. It might be a lot more complicated than we think. It might be a lot easier than we think. I remember a few years ago being amazed that, oh my God, there's a phone out there that you could call somebody and see who you're talking to. I mean, back to the question, I don't worry about that. I'm writing mysteries. The mystery is my main concern, to have it realistic, true to police procedure. And the time travel is just a little bit of fun that I threw in. So that's not something that bothers me in any way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's actually a big thing. So, it's always a fascinating theme. And as you said, it might one day become something that is possible. I mean, I remember when we used to watch the Jetsons when we were kids, and we used to be fascinated by how you can actually call a person and see the person on that device thing, that little contraption that is now our cell phone. So, and yeah, what's fiction today might be fact tomorrow. So that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I love the Jetsons, and they, sort of foresaw so many
Exactly.
things that like you say, the cell phone, the microwave, ovens, computers, whoever put those together really had a realistic and amazing imagination. Yeah, they're great.
And finally, we have a question by Paula Messina. How does your writing affect how you read a book? Oh, that's very interesting.
Okay, well, different ways. I've met so many people that a lot of times I'm now reading books by people I know. So I'm excited for them that they have a new book out and I'm enjoying it. But I also read it. I can still get lost in a book and find it very relaxing. But there's always I think a little part in the back of my mind that notices things now. Like, I was reading one of Anne Cleeve's books. Actually, I was reading a series, one of her series a while ago, 8 books in it. And I had just finished doing something in Death Rang the Bell. And I saw that she had done the same thing. And I thought, oh, I'm on the right path. That's good. That reads well, some technique. So I become aware of things. Sometimes I make a note that was a good idea, some technique that I want to remember to use. Or occasionally something that wouldn't work for me. But I think probably just becoming aware of the structure behind, like the structure behind the book. I never was aware of structure or developing arcs or where somebody put the red herring and how long did a writer take from the moment where they sort of asked a question and how long do they keep you hanging on before there's an answer. I notice how long chapters are. James Patterson, page and a half, boom. I try to leave cliffhangers at as many chapters I can so you want to read the next chapter right away. So I think, yeah, structurally, craft-wise, I'm aware.
Okay. John, does it change anything in the way you read?
Really hasn't at this point. Before I started the first series, I did do a lot of research just in reading a lot of different mystery series to get a sense of how they're structured. Because I was a screenwriter, I knew how movies are structured and how that 3-act structure works. Books aren't exactly the same because there's just more stuff going on. So it is easier to bury a clue in a mystery novel than it is, for example, in a TV mystery. As my wife and I watch TV mysteries, I can almost always tell when what is supposed to be a throwaway line is going to come back as that's not a throwaway line. That's a clue. That's a clue. Because in TV movies, you just have less dialogue than you can have in a book and less stuff. So I've found that it's much easier to fool someone with a book than it is with a movie, because you can just give them so much more detail. But it hasn't really changed the way I read them now. I'm pretty able to just turn that part of the brain off and just sit back and, like I say with Anthony Horowitz, just get lost. I have no idea what's going on.
Right. There's an interesting an interesting suggestion for one of the ideas we were speaking about when we mentioned quantum physics. Glenda says DARPA quantum stealth is a new kind of military invisibility cloak. Wow, we need to have one of those. Anything sci-fi can imagine becomes real someday. Google articles on the above. We sure will, Glenda. Thank you. That sounds very interesting. And for those of you who are interested in quantum physics, in pop culture, in literature, in science, in other fields of science such as psychology, we have the Psych Creative series, which is once a month. And we will be having a few sessions on quantum fiction, quantum art, and topics like that. So you may also want to stay tuned for one of these as well. Carol and John, thank you so much once again. Thank you for the wonderful novels, first of all, and thank you for the opportunity to chat with you. This was a wonderful, wonderful chat. It was very pleasant. We learned a lot, and especially about your work, which is just something to keep in mind. I mean, how to be a magician and not be a magician, how to write about or be inspired by what we don't understand in our lives, such as the phenomenon that you experienced, Carol, and then having it materialize into a series. So you left us with so much to think about. I want to wish you a wonderful day ahead. I know you're still in the morning zone now, so I hope you have a wonderful day. And everybody else, thank you for being here. Follow Carol and John on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Visit their websites. Stay tuned for their forthcoming works. And we're all very excited about seeing the novels that are coming up soon. And of course, reading the ones that we haven't read. So thank you all. The recording should be on our Indelible Evenings YouTube channel within 48 hours. So again, if you would like to subscribe to the channel, then you would know exactly when it is uploaded. It's just go to YouTube, click on Indelible Evenings, and you will find all of our videos there. So have a wonderful day, night, afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.